Adventure Nut here, coming at you with another raw dump of my consciousness, whether or not you want it. My guest star is, of course, The Yellow Couch, and today I wanted to talk about reality TV. Now, over the years, something unexpected happened to me. My wife convinced me to start watching some of the very common reality TV dating shows. We watched Love Island, we watched the US one. I tried watching the UK one. I couldn't really get into it. I watched Perfect Match. I watched The Ultimatum. I watched did I say Temptation Island? I watched Temptation Island. I may have said that already. I watched the Love at First Sight one that was really popular a number of years ago. I've watched a couple of episodes of Love is Blind, and I also watched the first 2 seasons of Too Hot to Handle. So I have seen my fair share of reality TV dating shows. And as I watched it, I noticed something very interesting. Every good reality TV show relies on something that I like to call the illusion. Well, what is this? Well, the illusion is essentially how good a show is at convincing you that its premise is meaningful and real and has some greater purpose, for lack of a better term. So to demonstrate this a little better, on one far side, the very low illusion spectrum, we have Perfect Match. The reason I say the illusion is low is the premise is very simple. Oh, people are here to find their perfect match, but it's very hard to take that premise seriously considering most of the people cast for this show have been on other reality dating shows before, and it makes you very skeptical of their motives. On the other side of the spectrum, you have shows like Love is Blind and Too Hot to Handle, where the idea is we're doing something productive and helpful for the people on the show. For Love is Blind, the idea is, well, these people couldn't find love the normal way, and so we're going to assist them by putting them in a situation where they're not basing it off of looks at all. And for Too Hot to Handle, the idea is these people have intimacy issues that we are trying to help them cure. Beyond that is shows like Temptation Island and The Ultimatum. The idea is we're going to take real couples in the real world and we're going to help them sort out some kind of issue in their relationship. And the entire show and premise of the show, down to the specifics of what occurs during the show, is all tied into this idea of the illusion. Now, you could also call the illusion the premise of the show, but I'm calling it an illusion for a very specific reason. Ultimately, all of these shows exist to be entertainment. They exist to be there as a means of explaining why the events of the show are happening. But it's an illusion because I'm very skeptical that any of these shows really are good for their purpose that they state. What do I mean by this? Well, to take Too Hot to Handle for an example, I'm not exactly sure how a show about people who engage in lots of casual relationships is supposed to benefit them when they force this therapy on them that isn't voluntary, which is a very important part of therapy, being voluntarily engaged and choosing to confront it, while giving them lots of fame that will make it easier for them to engage in the behavior that they supposedly have a problem with. Same thing with The Ultimatum or the Temptation Island show. Is the idea is, well, we have couples that either want to get married, one wants to get married and the other one doesn't, and at the end they're going to make some kind of decision. But it's an illusion because this breaks way more couples than it makes. I highly doubt the health of any of the couples on this show. And finally is the point that at the end, sometimes they don't decide to break up or get married, and people sometimes just leave like, oh, we've decided to get married, and then you find out later that they never did and they're still just kind of dating or broke up. The illusion is very important because without the illusion, it's very hard to get invested in the show and take the events of the show seriously. Plus, it lets you remember that many of these people are on these shows purely to chase clout. Across all seasons of The Bachelor, a report I saw said that only 4% of couples still are together after the conclusion of the show, and even shows like Love is Blind has a very low rate of about 12%. Really, we shouldn't find this all that surprising, considering the fact that the relationships portrayed on TV are completely unrealistic. These people are put in an environment that is not at all reflective of the natural state that the relationship would actually exist in. And I always find it really funny when you hear somebody talking about how perfect somebody is for them, and then you remember the fact that they've only known each other for a few days or weeks. It's like, yeah, you haven't had to encounter any of the real problems that a relationship may face. Not to mention you spend all of your time with that person and not in a realistic scenario. You're not dealing with them going out and you going out and working your job and dealing with stress. You're in an ideal situation. A lot of these people live very far apart and sometimes in different countries where getting together after the fact is pretty unrealistic. I also know it might be editing or just the conversations around it that are shown, or maybe it's just the environment that the shows take place. But if you really listen to the conversations that happen, most of the conversations are incredibly shallow and don't seem to have the real depth required to actually set up a proper relationship for success. Conversations about, future desires, people's ethical or principles in life, exactly what kind of family plans they want in life, what they think about specific topics that can cause contention, where they are financially, things that are potentially red flags to the other partner. None of these conversations are things we ever see on the show. They may occur behind the scenes, but they are edited to appear as shallow, flaky high school relationships. Now, originally, I wanted to discuss the ethics of reality TV. I wanted to find cases of abuse of contestants on these shows by producers in order to manipulate their behavior to make a more entertaining show. And I certainly found some examples. I found cases where people were underfed, not given water, given too much alcohol, and really manipulated and subjected to some pretty horrible things. Not to mention, contestants often face horrible backlash from their tenure on the show, and there's been some really tragic outcomes from that. It's not YouTube friendly, so I can't unfortunately talk about it as much as we should have that conversation. But then I wondered, is anybody actually going to stop watching these shows as a result of the knowledge of the exploitation going on in these shows? And the answer is probably not. If we are watching it, we are supporting the behavior. And it's all well and good to point out bad behavior, but if my life experience is anything to go by, just being aware of unethical behavior does very little to actually change the way people behave. We have many companies who are exploiting their employees significantly worse than these reality TV show contestants are being exploited, and yet we continue to buy their products. The amount of products we buy and consume because they are essentially made with slave labor is incredibly high. We're totally fine buying diamonds, or at least some of us are fine with it because we can't afford the alternative of buying diamonds mined in Africa, often by child labor, because we want to save money on our shiny rocks. And considering people are willing to ignore really serious abuse, how much less are they going to care about contestants on a show that are there voluntarily, typically attractive and doing well in some regard, otherwise they wouldn't be on the show. There's no crackhead dating show, and if there was, that would probably be very questionably ethical, but people would absolutely watch it. There's an idea for you. If you want to be a scummy Mr. Moneybags, make a crackhead reality show. That would be something that people would hate you for, but would absolutely watch every episode of. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying anybody should be mistreated for any reason, regardless of what position they're in. But just looking at human behavior, it's very unlikely that anything I say will have a real change. And I just kept getting more existential with this question, and I reached this point where I had to ask myself, does it matter what we watch? And the answer is unsurprisingly yes. Researchers found that people who watch reality TV shows are more likely to engage in social violence. Social violence is essentially socially toxic behavior. Lying, backstabbing, manipulation, talking about people behind their back. I guess that's kind of backstabbing, but you know what I mean by that. And just generally engaging in hostile, volatile social behavior is all categorized as social violence. One of the fundamental differences I see between reality TV shows and the kind of typical fiction media that we might watch, like normal shows, is that we know that when we're watching something fictional, it is fake, it is not real. And therefore, I think that we're less likely to engage in that kind of behavior because the scenarios and actions taken by the characters are not things that many of us realistically are ever going to engage in. I'm not going to go all John Wick on a group of soldiers and try to take 20 guys out with, some belly button lint and a toothpaste tube. But when you watch lots of underhanded behavior in reality TV shows and we see that that gets people ahead, that is something that we can relate to and are more likely to engage in purely because it is more relevant to our own life. Instead of slick one-liners and crazy revenge plots where we're just, going in guns blazing with both, our literal weapons and also our opinions, we're far more likely to take this safe, modest approach to the way we interact in person. When it comes to reality TV, on the other hand, it isn't clear to what degree they are fake. Sure, we all know that there is probably some level of manipulation on the part of the producers, but how deep that goes is unclear, and as we watch it, we are not necessarily critical of what we watch because we regard it as trash TV or lowbrow entertainment. We aren't consciously thinking about the way these things might affect our behaviors. Now, the good news is there's been some studies that show that being aware of the negative impact of media gives us some resistance against it and makes us less likely to be affected by the media we watch. And that's why I want to bring awareness to this topic so that we can protect ourselves from the potentially negative effects of watching these kinds of shows. Now, while I didn't find particular examples of this, many people, including many people far more qualified than I am, discussed how reality TV shows tend to display relationships in a very unrealistic manner. We tend to only get highlights and in these specialized environments that are not really relatable or real for any of us. However, this is exactly the problem. We already have such a problem with dating culture in the modern world. It is so hard for people to know how to engage in relationships healthily. And when we have all these models for us that are idealized or fake, how much worse does that make our expectations of how people should behave in dating? Not to mention, many of the behaviors carried out on these shows are just bad advice for dating in general. I mean, one theme I've seen across many of these dating shows is this idea that you have to explore relationships. You got to see what's out there so you're not missing anything with another partner. But the reality is that there's an infinite number of people functionally from our perspective, and all of those people have different pros and cons, and it's all about finding a person you love and value enough that you're willing to take the negative and love them in spite of it, and that you build a relationship beyond the flaws and shortcomings of the person. You can infinitely hunt around looking for the perfect person in a relationship, but the reality is that that person doesn't exist because perfect people don't exist, and if they do, they probably are already with someone. Instead, look for somebody who you love enough to look past those things and give yourself not to the person but to the relationship. But this kind of slow, realistic, healthy approach to relationships is not something we see on reality TV because it's boring. Now, ultimately, I'm not going to tell you to stop watching reality TV. I stopped watching it because I got bored of it, not for any kind of ethical reasons, but I'm hoping by telling people of some of the problems with it, they will be more protected when they go and watch this and maybe are a bit more critically aware of what they are consuming and have the awareness that it is going to impact their lives. I'm Adventure Nut. This has been me in the Yellow Couch, and I hope to see you guys next week. Thank you so much for watching, and hang in there. Hang in there. You guys are doing it. It's a tough time, but I have faith in all of you that you're going to be able to make it work for yourself in some manner or another. And if not, virtual hugs coming from me. I hope that helps. See you guys next week.